Hello and welcome to AXSChat. I'm really delighted to welcome one of the first people that I really followed on Twitter many years back to AXSChat. It's Derek Featherstone at Feather. Derek is now the Chief Experience Officer for Level Access. I think it is really well past time that we had you on because you've been doing great work in sharing the joy of accessibility for a long time. So welcome, Derek. It's really a pleasure to have you with us. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role and a little bit about the thinking behind the title of Chief Experience Officer?
Sure, yeah, and thank you for for having me. It is truly an honor to be here. The work that you as a team do with AXSChat is pretty phenomenal, and so I'm really honored to be here. And I'm not even just saying that because I'm talking to you. I'm serious about that. It's pretty cool to be on this show, and you're all leaders, so I'm pretty pumped right now. So yeah, I've already spoken so much I forgot what you asked. My title, and sort of the genesis of the title. So yeah, I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Level Access, and I use that the abbreviation for that is the CXO, not the CEO, partly because we see a lot of different experience-based monikers out there. So the field of UX or user experience is UX, and CX for customer experience and that sort of thing. So I picked up on the X, and so it's really something that I'm kind of excited to have that title because it's to me a signal to the world that ultimately accessibility is a big part of user experience, and it's not just this field that involves technical compliance. With a lot of organizations, accessibility rolls up underneath legal and risk and compliance and those sort of efforts. But my desire for many years now has been to make this more of a thing that is holistic and not just about code and engineering and development, but really making sure that this sits in everybody's pocket as part of their as part of the work that they do, and really focusing on the design side of things. To me, that's a big piece of this, is making sure that that everybody is involved in this, and that it's not just left to things at the engineering and the testing stage. So that's a big part of it, and part of it is to signal that to the world, and to really let people know that that's the way that we should be thinking about things, rather than simply making it an engineering problem.
It's fantastic. Deborah, I know you've got a question.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your merger with Level Access, and I noticed it a couple of days ago. Level Access was actually named as one of the top 100 places to work in Washington, D.C. So congratulations to your
Thank you.
firm on that, even though I know you're joining us from Canada, Ottawa, not from Washington, D.C. So.
No.
But I agree with Neil. I don't know how we haven't had you on before, because you are a real legend, very innovative and training legend in our industry. And so I often would look at the training you were putting out and think, wow, that's good. Very good, innovative, fun training. And of course, when we're having fun, we learn more. So congratulations, and all of that. But how do we've talked about it a little bit on the program, but there are still people that think that you can't, that accessibility and innovation and creativeness don't go hand in hand, which I totally disagree with. And I know your life's work is proving that that's not true. And so I like that you're thinking about it experimentally, what is right for the user and the customer. I don't know how can you not think about it like that? But there's actually many designers and developers that don't think about that. So I was just wondering if you'd comment on that.
Yeah, that's been a thing that I remember noticing this way back in the day, like 2004, 2005. I remember building websites and doing things the right way, the way that we had been taught, and the way that we had learned from best practices around the world for, using progressive enhancement, making sure that things work. Back at the time, we were all big about, let's make it work with JavaScript on and JavaScript off. And we had built interfaces that were really, technically compliant. They were super sound and architecturally solid. Everything was great, except when we were working with people with disabilities testing it, it didn't work. Right. we had this idea that it was going to be accessible, but it was only kind of accessible on paper. And so when we started seeing that kind of opened my eyes to, like, wow, there's much more to this than that. Like, we've come up with all these creative techniques and really, really strong best practices and principles for making things accessible. But if at the end of the day they don't work for people with disabilities, it's kind of like, why did we bother making it compliant if it still doesn't work? And I know there's a huge, there's a lot of different pieces that come into this. It's not just about what designers and developers do. It's about what browser vendors and assistive technology vendors do on their side of on their side of it as well. But ultimately, that kind of led me down the road of, we need to look beyond just making sure things are compliant and bring in other aspects. And I think that for me was like a moment in time where I kind of realized, like, we need to do more. There's a lot of room for coming up with really creative solutions, but we need to use those opportunities of seeing how people with disabilities actually use things. And then let's build solutions that really work in reality and not just on paper. So I think there's you kind of talk about the innovation side of things. There's huge opportunity there that we just haven't even, we barely started to scratch the surface, I think, in terms of innovation and working with people with disabilities and how that all fits together. I think we're only just getting started on that, to be honest.
I agree with you. And I also find, I was speaking to Larry Goldberg this morning on my show, and we were talking about how they are engaging with their customers and their users and how they're learning the most about, they think, oh, we're going to do it this way. And then they hear from their users, it's like, oh yeah, well, let me show you how that actually is working for me as an individual with a disability, or, an individual. And so they've really found some interesting ways of engaging with their customers and really listening to what their customers are saying. But I will tell you, most brands are not listening to their customers. It almost feels sometimes like some brands think us customers are annoying, which we probably are sometimes, but you can learn a lot from engaging with your customers. I mean, that's what we talk a lot about on AXSChat, but how does being the chief experience officer, how do you make sure that everyone is listening to your customers and your customers' customers? And how do you encourage brands that you're working with to really engage and listen to what's being said about the work that's being done to assure innovation, accessibility, and that all of the needs are being met? I think that's a huge challenge these days.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think a big piece of it is kind of, there's a lot of companies right now that are, big companies that are kind of putting their hands up and saying, we are creating an inclusive design practice, and here's what that means. And when, as much as, I've been doing my best to kind of push for that for many years, but when big brands kind of call it out and say, this is the way that we're approaching things and here's why, a lot of the other big brands and smaller brands, they start to listen and they start to pay a bit more attention to that. So, I'm kind of calling that out, and I've done, workshops before, inclusive design workshops, and I did another one called Extreme Design, which is really about, we see all kinds of things I'll be doing workshops, and I'll just be doing a thing with designers or doing a thing with developers, and almost all the time people will say, near the end, something along the lines of, that design, we just improved that because of accessibility reasons, and based on people's specific accessibility needs, but that's actually just a better design, period. Like, you just made that better for everyone. And I'm, my response is usually like, exactly. And so one of the things that we try to do as much as we can is get people involved with what we might consider, you hear people with disabilities talked about often as like, well, it's such a small portion of the population, or they're outliers and things like that. We can't take everybody into account. And to me, that's just, it's kind of like that's almost the equivalent of saying, like, it's inconvenient for me to think about people with disabilities, so we're not going to do it. And so one of the things that we're kind of actively working on with different brands is getting to the point where we engage people with disabilities right at the beginning of a project. So most people come to us when they're partway through, or they're at the end, or they've for whatever reason, they've got a legal demand made of them, or there's some kind of subject to a settlement agreement. People come to us at all different stages, but it's almost never right at the beginning. And so one of the things that we're looking at doing as much as we can is how can we bring people with disabilities into a design process from the beginning. And when we work with people with disabilities with all kinds of different accessibility needs right from the get-go, that creates all kinds of opportunities for innovation that we hadn't even thought about. And so we working with and talked with one client very recently. They were talking about a new product that they wanted to build, and we've worked with them many times before. And so they kind of said, we need to get you in at the beginning. And so we just started some conversation, and we talked about providing for that product. And I'm going to speak in very vague terms here because I can't really disclose any of it, but we talked about sort of what would the experience be, how would we take into account these different accessibility needs. And one of those was, how do we provide a text equivalent for that particular piece of functionality, or how do we make sure that somebody with mobility challenges can work with that part of the interface given its kind of current idea. And we went through and we talked about all of that. And the people that I was talking with had like 3 other ideas that spawned off from that said, I think, it was basically like, I think you just changed the direction that we need to go with this product, because it gave us this idea of this thing that actually that's a thing that everybody would want. And we only got to there because we were thinking about these different accessibility needs.
Absolutely. So I talk in very similar terms. So we talk about accessibility and looking at the needs of people with complex needs. So we don't talk about disabilities, we talk about people with complex needs, creating triggers for innovation, because often it is disability that creates a need to look at new solutions, or maybe even new technologies. So these are things that are of great benefit to organizations, because it is a trigger for innovation. And so I think there's a recognition of that. Following up on what you said, we've got evidence from our own work that on average, I guess the cost of doing accessibility, if you plan for it, is around 3%, 2 to 3% of the total cost of a project. I mean, different projects, different costs, but averaged out is around 2 to 3%, which is, a third of the contingency budget. Not a lot. Whereas we've had projects, and I won't say which ones, but I know of projects where, it's retrofitting accessibility, and the cost of retrofitting was 110% of the project cost.
Yeah.
So, it pays to plan. It really does. So that's absolutely with you on that. But also, I think that the whole idea, and I'd like to come back to this in a minute. I'm sure Antonio's got a question. The whole idea that these edge cases can't be of benefit to everyone is fallacious, because actually it's when you're thinking about the edge cases that you find benefits for the widest number of people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's when I remember a quote from the design firm IDEO, and they talked about dealing with sort of different design problems and examining extremes at each end of something. So how does this thing work for somebody that is 18 months old, and how does it work for somebody that is 95 years old? And they have this great quote, and I'm not going to say it quite right, but basically they make the claim that by looking at the extreme ends of a spectrum, so to speak, when you make things work for both, you end up making it so that it works for everybody in between as well.
Exactly.
And so it the benefit is there, and it's been something that we've seen anecdotally over and over and over again, and the benefits, they don't end. So it doesn't make sense not to do it from the beginning, because of that opportunity to make something that works better for more people.
Well, no, I was at the Digital Assembly, an event that happened in Europe this week, where there's a good number of focus about on e-health and digital health, and building systems for citizens to be able to have their information on their pockets, on their mobiles, and go to a doctor and receive the service, and allow the doctor to access to their services. And we're talking here about accessibility, people who are building accessible systems that are not accessible. At the same time, the web is, and our system is an extension, somehow an extension of ourselves. So why are we still talking about accessibility and the need for accessibility, when if we want to create a web that works, it needs to be for everyone? Otherwise, how can we aim to create something that works as an extension of ourselves if we are still on this conversation of them and us?
That's a big part of why I like the difference between accessibility and inclusive design. So I look at it this way: accessibility is an outcome, right? It's a measure of an outcome, and there are 100 different ways that you could reach an accessible outcome to make something that can be used by people with different disabilities. But sometimes, it can happen by accident. It can happen through making an inaccessible thing deliberately, and then making another version that is accessible. We can make something that we think is accessible, find out that it's not, and then go back and retrofit it. We can still end up at an accessible outcome. I like thinking about inclusive design because ultimately that, inclusive design is really broad. I'm thinking of it in terms of specifically accessibility and people with disabilities needs right now. But, inclusive design is much broader in our society now in terms of thinking about everybody and making sure that we are creating things that are inclusive. But my take on it is, when we practice inclusive design deliberately, intentionally, we create outcomes that are not only accessible, but they are easy to use for everybody. And so that's why I love that sort of thing. With inclusive design, there is no them and us. It's making this work really broadly for everyone, and doing it intentionally from the beginning. And that's, I think, my favorite piece of that. The difference between accessibility and inclusive design is just that. There's lots of ways it could happen. Let's choose inclusive design because it does exactly that. It breaks down that them and us barrier and just brings us all in together.
It's a great point, and I was just trying to scribble down the quote while I still remember it. I think the other thing that I'm really keen on, and the misconception that often happens when we're talking with developers is like, oh God, here comes the accessibility guy again. He's going to be the fun killer, the person that tells me that I can't do the stuff that I really want to do. I think that we spend a long time dispelling those myths. You can have really nice, accessible websites that are inclusive and still fun to use and joyful. And actually, I mean, I think that accessibility is joyous if we do this right, if we are inclusive, we are ideating, we are finding new ways, we're being innovative. Actually, rather, and I'm echoing your point here, rather than it being something that kills the creative process, being inclusive should be a joy for designers because it's asking them to be more creative, right?
I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, all too often accessibility is the villain. Like, you know, we're finger wagging and we're shaming people and you know, we're making people feel, you know, like they don't know what they're doing, even if they actually don't know what they're doing. You know, we don't necessarily want to make people feel that way. We're not going to get anywhere with those kind of tactics. And one of the things that, you know, I believe really strongly is that accessibility for years, our entire industry, accessibility has been pretty overwhelming. You know, to somebody that's new to it, it's not welcoming. You know, I don't know how welcoming accessibility as a community is to begin with. I mean, there's lots of aspects of that, and there's definitely, you know, individuals. Absolutely, every person that I know that is in the accessibility industry that I've met personally, I've been like, I like this person. This is cool, but there's something about us as an industry that ends up not being necessarily all that welcoming, and I think that puts people off. You know, for a lot of people, it's the unknown. They don't know what it's about, and so they're like, you know, they're kind of like, I don't want to even talk to you. But you know, I think the overwhelm is a real thing, and I know that's part of the reason that, you know, I try to make every training that we do and every talk that I give in public, like, I want people laughing. I want them coming away from a talk feeling like, I totally get this. I don't know everything, but I could totally do this. And that it was a, you know, an enjoyable experience. And, you know, I try to look at it as you know, as just that. Like, I want to make this as much as I can like a joyous experience. Like, people get a really good feeling coming out of a full, whether it's a full hour talk or a full day workshop. I kind of want people coming out of there excited and engaged and ready and excited to do more. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm totally with you. I mean, anyone that as a newbie comes to the WCAG mailing list will run a mile. I think, you know, the guidelines themselves are a cognitive accessibility nightmare. You know, I can't, as someone with dyslexia and a short-term memory of a goldfish, remember which success criteria numbers relate to which. So there is a usability issue with the foundations of accessibility, which is a bit scary, and certainly doesn't feel welcoming. And yet the outcomes of accessibility are so important, and the people are genuinely good people and everything else. So yeah, I'm totally with you. We need to be making it welcoming. We need to be making it easy. We need to be enthusing people because it is a joy. I know Deborah's got a question, so I'm going to hand over to Deborah.
Well, and I totally agree with both of you. I know that Greg Vanderheiden once said that we've got to stop eating our young, and I could not agree with him more. And this, unfortunately, not just accessibility. This is disability inclusion too. I was running a conference this week for the United Nations International Labor Organization, and we had just some brilliant content in there. And of course, this is all a work in progress. We're all still working on this. And by the way, we should all still be working on it because technology continues to advance and change in ways that, you know, it's just astonishing and overwhelming and great and everything else. But somebody made a comment about one of the panelists using some italics, and she said, people with dyslexia hate italics. And I said, well, you know, let me ask my friends with dyslexia, do you hate italics? So it's just the things that people choose to jump onto and criticize. Sometimes you wonder, but did you hear the, you know, the 2,000 innovative things that were said by that person? Or were you so distracted because they I can't even say the word. They
italicization.
Whoa, you know, and I find sometimes it feels like certain members of the audience, whether it is the social media audience, the global audience in a room, they're just waiting for you to screw up. They're just waiting for you to screw up, and then they're so happy to tell you you screwed up. And I think we all get that as leaders in this industry for a long time, but it is very intimidating to corporate brands. It's very intimidating to developers wanting to really do the right thing. I was a programmer for years. And luckily, I'm not anymore because I got good at it, but I hated it. I hated that you can mess up the word and or and create pandemonium at the bank. Whoops. And so I just hated how visible my mistakes were, because I make a lot of mistakes. But I just do think it's really a shame that we are so unwelcoming in the community that's really trying to make sure that the voices are heard. And I think it makes it difficult sometimes when we're trying to get more people to identify with the community and feel like they are part of the community, whether it's the community of people with disabilities, people that want to age in place, accessibility through developers and designers.
Yeah.
I just, and that's why, once again, I've always enjoyed your work, Derek, because I would look at the training you were doing. I actually would send my team to it, and you always made it fun. And when you make training fun and innovative and creative, you know, you're learning. I think I know that I learn much better when things are presented to me in a creative, innovative way, and more as a, well, I never even knew that. Instead of you talking to me like I'm a bad person because I didn't know that. And I'll give you an example that I might have talked about on the show before, but I remember being in a very large event years and years ago, probably 2003. And it was a very large, very well-attended event with many corporations. And they were trying to explain to the corporations why disability inclusion was so important in the workforce and making things accessible. And one woman got up in front of the room and she started signing. And I, unfortunately, am not a very good signer. But so she started signing. And she signed, it seemed to feel in an uncomfortable amount of time. And most of us in the audience did not know what she was signing. So she signed for a long time, and then she stopped and she said, how does that feel? How do you like being left out? And the very large corporate representative sitting right next to me leaned over and said, it feels like I'll never attend one of these events again. And I thought, see, this is not good. This is not good. Please don't make the audience feel guilty about what they don't know. You are here to train us and make us feel like we actually could be smart enough to figure this out someday. And so you've done a really good job with that, Derek. Definitely let me give you the floor.
Well, you know, first, thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate it. I really understand this is an emotional thing. Like, there's a lot of emotion that goes to it. And so a lot of things that happen, some of the behaviors you've described, they happen for a whole lot of different reasons. One of them is like just straight up anger. Like, people are frustrated and angered for being discriminated against for so long. And so there's a natural inclination. I think it's a very human trait. I have been wronged, therefore I'm going to get somebody back. right? And or I'm going to prove my point regardless of the consequences, or we don't necessarily even know what the consequences will be. There's kind of that feeling of like, people were probably, after that signing episode, many people were probably like, whoa. And some people probably went, oh, I get it. But other people are probably like the gentleman you said, like, I don't want to be part of this. This is like, I don't want to be part of this anymore. So I think the emotional side of it runs really high with a lot of people. And that's part of why I like the making things really engaging and fun makes it feel not threatening. It makes it feel so that people want more. It makes it feel, and I can, I think most of the time I can get the points across in much the same way, or to the same kind of level of effectiveness without using guilt. I don't, when 95% of the workshop or the training is fun, then I think those little pieces that are like, that could come across as guilt or trying to make somebody feel guilty don't come across that way, because everything else has been so positive and fun. So instead of people feeling guilty, they feel surprised, or they feel, they feel, like, oh, I've got more to learn here, and I'm going to take this away and do something with it. So I think every emotion we go through every emotion when we're in this field, and when we're talking with people and working with people. And I think it's kind of human and pretty natural.
I think that's a fair point. There are times when we do need to show people the difficulties that other people are encountering, but it's the method and the attitude that we take whilst we're doing that makes all the difference in how that comes across and how people engage with us. And absolutely 100% with you. We need to do that in a way that is embracing people, embracing newcomers, welcoming them in to the big tent of accessibility, and absolutely that was a primary reason why we wanted to start AXSChat, and why we talk about a really broad range of topics and less about the technical issues, is because we're almost like the sort of the starter point, the sort of we're the low-hanging fruit of accessibility. We're accessible accessibility people.
Indeed.
So and that's what we intend to be, because we need deep experts, but we also need to be able to attract more people in to do this stuff. The global demographics are quite clear. People are getting older. 83% of people that acquire a disability acquire it during their working lifetime. So we need to be doing this stuff, and we need help.
Yeah.
There's not enough of us.
Yeah, definitely.
Can't do it alone. So we need to do that through being nice, right? I think it was John Folio that said he wanted to be the fireman rather than the policeman, rather than the cop.
Indeed. Although I would say, I don't want to run around putting out fires either. So
no, true.
I agree with John though, but yeah, I think we need a better. Yeah. We need something better.
Better analogy.
Analogy.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think you spend more time climbing ladders to pick cats out of trees.
Fair.
Okay. I think we're probably at the end of our half hour. It's flown by. It's been brilliant fun. I think that we could talk about this topic forever. I need to thank our friends at Barclays for continuing to support us. It's great to have large corporates behind us, standing shoulder to shoulder with small accessibility people, saying this is something we believe in. So thank you, Barclays, and thank you to everyone that participates in AXSChat every week, because without the community, we wouldn't be able to do this. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you all so much. It was a true pleasure, and happy to do more anytime you want.